Let's welcome to Laura on the stage. Take over the mic. Wish you all the best.
Thank you everyone for attending. I know it's late in the day and you're probably tired, but we're here and we have an opportunity to learn from experiences from each one of us. And my experience is an experience that came from being around a woman named Debbie Ford. And I don't know if any of you know anything about Debbie Ford, but she was the woman who wrote The Shadow Effect and about 3 books on the shadow. One of them was with Deepak Chopra, that she wrote the book. And what they did was compile their experiences. Well, when I first saw Debbie, she was so unbelievably beautiful to look at. But she told her story, how she had gone from being a drug addict and she would do anything until she was around 29, she said, which I thought, oh, Saturn return. And her whole body, after the Saturn return, changed and became this beautiful light being, just phenomenal. And then, after doing this work where she started to talk about the shadow issues and how we're affected, our whole life's path is affected by the things that we hide from others, the things that we keep beneath the surface or repress. And anything that's repressed after a while becomes like a pressure cooker. It explodes. So I'm going to give examples today of people who have had these explosions in their life. But the interesting part about Debbie Ford is that after a period of time, and she was on the Today Show and she was on Oprah, a very good friend of Oprah Winfrey's, she ended up getting cancer and dying. And I thought, so at a very young age, she ended up dying. It was like her message got out to the world. And now, and she gave ways to overcome this shadow. So I'm going to kind of talk about that. But when I heard her lecture, I thought, oh, this is perfect for astrology, because the times that she gave, that she went through all of this, was astrological timing. 29 years old, she finally got a grip on her own life and finally decided, I'm going to start to work on healing myself. And others was the key here. She decided to help other people heal themselves. So anyway, we're on this journey. And now I'm going to learn how to do this right here and now. All right. So Carl Jung is the person who termed the shadow. He's the one who first came up with it. And we've had 3 or 4 lectures already where the shadow has been addressed, and all in reference to Carl Jung's work. And he believed that all of us have a dark side. Now, what's interesting about a shadow is if you're walking towards the light, then you have a shadow. But if the light is directly above you, you do not have a shadow. If it's high noon, there's no shadow. So the most amount of light in the sky leaves you without a shadow, and the least amount of light leaves you without a shadow. So remember that. Most amount of light, no shadow. Least amount of light, no shadow. It's powerful when you think about it. So the luminaries, in fact, have a lot to do with our shadow. So new moon, full moon are keys in a chart. The other 2 keys that I look for, and what I'm saying is not necessarily what is written here, because all of you have access to this, so I'm going to kind of ad lib. But we all have this hidden side to us, and more recently, and especially in the United States, I don't know about other countries, but in the United States, there's been an upheaval with regards to the sexual actions of another and how it is impacting everyone. And right down to the point that someone who's so famous as Matt Lauer of the Today Show had to pay for something that happened 17 years earlier, where he did something with a woman and it was consensual, but he lost his job, he lost his marriage, he lost his home, everything. Within a matter of weeks, everything he had ever worked for is gone. Why? Because of this shadow issue. Now, it wasn't just him, it was many men have gone through the exact same thing. But I want to bring it to your attention that for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. So if in fact somebody has created a perpetrator, there's compliance in some way that this all happened. So until there's balance brought back into the situation, it can't be healed. And that's what shadow is all about, finding where the balance point is. And the ascendant-descendant axis has a lot to do with creating balance within our own lives. The Aries-Libra point, where these are the equinoxes. So we're looking to find where the ruler of these points, how they're aspected. All right, so the dark side gives us perspective, lets us look at our opposite. And that's something you might want to do, is take a moment in time and actually reflect on what's your opposite. What do you feel is your best quality? Think about that for a moment. Then think about what would be the opposite of that, because that's the one you need to heal, is that opposite point. And you may go, oh, I don't think I really do that, but we find it in the other. So projection is all part of the shadow. It's like a movie we're projecting. So we're trying to bring back the light to ourselves. And shadow deals with the areas where we've been hurt. The thing is that when we're born in, we have a chart for that first breath that is taken. That means that there has to be a past life for that chart to operate correctly, that these are other incarnations that we're healing through. And there's a theory called 7 lifetimes or 7 generations, that we're healing the karmic pattern from 7 generations. So remember to look at your history, the family history, to see where there could be things that have happened already within the family that you're starting to heal. So once we understand this pain, and whenever there's pain, then you know immediately the shadow issues have been touched off. And a lot of us, you know, we might make it through a day without any barbs into our body, but sometimes the pain can come for a long period of time. So I always believe that pain is trying to get us to address our shadow. All right, then, once you're able to liberate yourself from that, it's our job, especially as astrologers, to try to help others through using the chart. A chart, like if there's T-squares or oppositions or even a grand trine, there are points within that grand trine where there's an opposition. So these points you want to look at, because now I've changed my focus. When I do a reading for a client, I'm looking at where their shadow issues are, because I can help them a lot more if I look at that. So it's the undeveloped side of ourself that needs to become whole and for. So we find what is objectionable in others is actually a reflection of what's in ourself. What things do you do unconsciously is something you really want to take a look at. What are your patterns, your unconscious patterns? And most of the time, people who are conscious, that shadow is not very big. Their issues are not very big. It's when you're not conscious of it that it can grow. So take a long, hard look at yourself, write down, maybe recapitulate, and recapitulate means to go back from day one and go back as far as you can on your history, or I call it her story, her story. So look at your story and take back one day at a time, and then you'll see the patterns that are lying within your own story. Story, by the way, is a function of the moon. So the family story, or the family history. And try to get perspective of the disowned part of yourself. Again, all of that has to be because you're conscious enough to look. And really be patient with the process because, like I mentioned before, this took lifetimes for this type of a reaction to come about. Lifetimes. There could be something hidden way back where you were violent, or may have even, something really terrible that you did, and it's still held within the memory, or it's held within the family memory. I know, in my case, I know there are things that are held within the family unit, the family memory. And I can feel it when I'm around the other siblings. What are you disassociated from? What do you not want to actually look at? Those are the areas that are the hardest to deal with. So think of it as like unpacking a suitcase. That all this garbage is inside this suitcase. And the last thing you want to do is open that up because it stinks, number one. Dirty laundry, all that. You know, when you go through customs and when you've been on a trip, the last thing you want to do is have them open up that suitcase. Well, that's the way this is. The last thing you want to do is open that all up. But when you judge another, you're judging yourself. Remember, for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So when we reflect on this, we can really get a grip on what we're doing. But step out of that comfort zone. Really important, because it's hard to look at some of this. Now, it helps if you've got friends that you can do this with, and maybe get a support group where you're actually looking at it. And the first person to be nice to is yourself, because this is not just you doing it. There's a whole family lineage that has created some of these problems. And how does it manifest? When we get angry, when we're afraid, when we're jealous, when we feel insecure. These are all resentment, guilt, shame. These are all manifestations of having a shadow. So those patterns, after a certain point, don't serve us any longer. So we're going to be able to look at some of that in a moment. We're going to look at some of the charts. But the key here is to try to bring yourself back into balance. You need to look at the one. You can't see the light without seeing the darkness. We have equal 12 hours of daylight, 12 hours of darkness at the equinox. That's when day and night are equal, but so are the weather patterns. So what happens is you feel like, oh, this is perfect now. It's not too hot, not too cold. The weather patterns also affect this shadow. So Carl Jung considered the shadow to be the guardian of the threshold to the unconscious and the primary catalyst to individuation. That's a pretty powerful statement. So once we're able to look at where we're not healthy, where we have a problem. So let's just say someone said to me, oh, I have this medical issue. Now, when you look at something in a medical way, then you go, oh, is it your knee? If it's your knee, you have control issues. You you want to do it all yourself. You don't trust that somebody else can do it as good as you. These are Capricorn issues. So when I hear somebody telling me something, then I go, okay, let's take a look at the issues behind that, because those are shadow issues. Does that make sense to you? Okay. Now those wounds can be very deep, and I'll give you some examples in a moment of how deep they can go. And really looking at the memories, that's when you start to add in progressions and transits, midpoints, solar arcs. These are all techniques to allow you to get timing down and the interpretation. Now, the two primary planets that are involved with the shadow are Saturn and Pluto, because they have such a grip on what you do next and what motivates you. So the primary shadow is Pluto, which we all know, yes, that's probably the one. The Lord of the underworld and of darkness. Sounds like a scary movie, and it is. But it deals with abuse in childhood, or a controlling parent, or sexual issues, and or both. So when you get into these areas, there's shame and guilt involved with it also. So it really takes over somebody's whole life after a while. All right, then Saturn is the other one. And the wounds that come from Saturn are where you feel like you're not good enough, or you could be limited, or you're not functioning. Saturn is to function. You're not functioning correctly. And Pluto is different. It makes you feel like you're not safe, that you might get abused again. And so there are people who may have been abused in their childhood, and the act itself may have been minutes, but the rest of their life, they use that one thing as their point of reference. So they're carrying this shadow on their back. So think of it as baggage, big time luggage. So when you fail to come to terms with that dark side, you become a victim. And that's why there was this example where this lady was counseling this woman, and she said, let me get it right. You were abused, and it was maybe 10 minutes, and your whole life has been wrapped around that one thing ever since. So think about that. Whatever our shadow issues are, we want to try to clear it if possible, and forgive and let go, release. Oh, wrong one. Okay, so the planetary aspects, you really want to take a look at the 12th house. The 12th house is our past lives, and the ruler of that 12th house, you want to see how it's aspected. And because it is telling you the story, the most recent story anyway. And so to that, you want to add the progressions and directions and midpoints. I'm a midpoint specialist. I work with a 90-degree dial, and it gives me probably the most accurate timing. It's phenomenal what you can get from solar arcs. All right, so the first chart that I want to show you is Charles Ponzi. How many of you know who Charles Ponzi is? Well, you've heard of the Ponzi scheme. How many of you have heard of that, a Ponzi scheme? Okay. Well, he was selling these bonds, and he didn't have anything to give to people. And think about this, this is in the 20s, when people had no money, but they were mortgaging their home to buy these bonds from him, because he promised that as soon as within 45 days, they would double their money. Well, yeah, most people would do it. And so there was a frenzy to buy these bonds from him, and it was all a lie. But the first people who got involved, he gave the money that he made from the next people. And then he had time in which to pay off some of the people. So they were saying, oh yeah, I made a lot of money off that. You should do it. So anyway, he ended up going to jail. And the interesting thing is he was a very good-looking man, and he had a way about him that everyone trusted him. So we're going to look at his chart in a moment. But he was making $250,000 a day in 1920. Think about that. $250,000 a day off these bonds that he never really had. So he ended up in prison and dying in Rio de Janeiro. You know, he really took it to the farthest end. But in today's money, that would be over $2.5 million a day that he was making off people. Now, what's interesting, there's an asteroid called Bilk, and this Bilk is prominent in the charts that I'm going to show you. All right, so Ponzi's chart, the main thing that I want to show you here. Okay, so the main thing that I want you to see here is that he was considered very credible, that you could talk to him and really he would listen. He had a great attention factor. As I said, he was very good looking, but money was the all-important thing, and greed came up. So his Mercury was square to Pluto. So I'll come over here so you can see it. Here's his Mercury, here's his Pluto. And Pluto is in the sign of Taurus. Pluto square to Mercury, and you know, some of us have that aspect, so don't get all freaked out, but because I'm going to show you a chart which is different. But this Pluto square to Mercury, Mercury's at the top of the chart. It shows that he had sales ability. And you know what's funny about him at the end, he actually, the joke is that he could sell you land which was covered with water. Well, that's what he did at the end. He sold property that was covered by water. But he could sell anything, in other words. He just had a gift with that. Well, Mercury rules sales, like a Mercury-Venus would be a good salesperson. Well, he had Mercury square to Pluto. Pluto is other people's money. And so there's a point here where he had, this is like a person who has all the secrets of a person, financial secrets. He can hold that energy. Well, and he had their money. Now, what's interesting is this Saturn is at 8 degrees of Taurus. The charts that I'm going to show you have a point at 8 degrees Taurus, which is, and or Scorpio, which was fascinating to me. And it might be interesting to look up the Sabian symbol on that. But, and he was very good looking. Everyone felt comfortable around him. All right, the next chart is Bernie Madoff, which became the most famous for the Ponzi scheme that he had. So his shadow issues came out and affected hundreds and hundreds of people who were taken by Bernie Madoff. And I call it M-A-D-E-O-F-F. He made off with all this money of others. So he, $65 billion with a B, he took from others. 65 billion. Do you know what a billion is? Just to have $1 billion, that's how much he took, and he lived this really fancy lifestyle. And he, for some reason, wasn't investigated for years. And he didn't get into this part of it until he was around 26 years old, and his son was born. And I thought, oh, that's a demarcation line. And I looked at his chart on a 90-degree dial, and he had a Sun Saturn at that time. So this becomes interesting when you look at it into the future. So anyway, he started this company in New York, and his boys, his two sons, were working with him on a different floor of the building in Manhattan. Now, HBO did a movie on it, which is on Amazon. So if you want to find out more about Bernie Madoff, they did a really good representation of what transpired. It's called The Wizard of Lies. He's in prison right now, and he said finally, as far as his life is concerned, he's relieved. He feels now every day he can, he feels better about himself than he did. He said it was relief to actually end up going to prison. And what's interesting is his sons are the ones who turned him in. They're the ones, he told his sons, and they turned him in. The morning that he told them, they turned him in to the FBI. All right, so this is some of the data on him, and his son, on the second anniversary of the going to prison, killed himself because he couldn't take the pressure any longer on what had happened, because no one believed that these two boys could be there in the same building and know nothing about what their father had done, how his shadow had manifested to such a degree that he couldn't stop making money off all these people. The day that happened, I went back to the 90-degree dial to see if there was a signature there, and the exact same signature when the child was born at 26 was there when he died, which was a Sun Saturn on solar arc, so it's very specific. Okay, and Bilk is in this chart also. I'm down to 5 minutes? Okay. Well, I'm going to move this along, but Bernie Madoff has the exact same aspect. He has the Mercury square to Pluto, and that's why now I'm really watching. If I buy anything from someone, I want to make sure they don't have a Mercury Pluto. But here is this 8 degrees of Taurus again. So I thought, oh dear, there you go. And Bernie's Pluto is at 27 degrees Cancer, and the Sun and the Mercury is 26 degrees Aries. What's interesting is Uranus is on his Mercury now, so he can actually change this karmically if he wants to. The transiting Uranus has been on that Mercury, which allows us to make changes. I was going to do Jeffrey Dahmer's chart, and I think we don't have enough time, but if you look here, he has the Mercury square Pluto also, and his shadow manifested in where he was working in a chocolate factory. Can you imagine eating that chocolate? Well, he killed at least, they think around 17 men that he killed. So his shadow, he repressed his sexual desires to the point. And sexual desire, I find a lot of times when it's repressed, is a Mars and Neptune. A lot of shadow stuff. It's also the spiritual warrior. So it could be one or the other. All right, then the last one, I want to take you to someone who actually switched this same pattern and used it by going towards the light as opposed to going to darkness. And this is in the article that all of you have, so you can read all of this about Jeffrey Dahmer. The last person is Mother Teresa, of all people, has the Mercury square Pluto, but she took that energy and changed it around and took it towards the light. square of Mercury square Pluto also. So, but I thought, okay, this is really fascinating. Here's the Mercury at 29 Virgo, making a square to Pluto, which is almost 28 degrees Gemini. So what she did is make people aware that they had enough money that they could help others and use and transcend that energy. Now, maybe in a previous lifetime it was different, but in this one she really used it. So she became someone who really took this to the highest point. And I wanted to say, once again, here is the Saturn, which is almost 7 degrees of Taurus. So it's just fascinating to me that even though they all had the same thing, one decided to change the outcome of it completely and selflessly use the exact same energy that was in these other charts, the Mercury square Pluto, and that critical point over and over again came out that was either 7 to 8 degrees of fixed position, either Taurus or Scorpio. All right, I want to thank you for letting me come and lecture. Namaste.